Hello and welcome to Bright Wings, children's books to make the heart soar. I am your host, Charity Hill. The purpose of this conversation is to help mothers and fathers identify books that will liberate their children to embrace truth, goodness, and beauty. After Bob books, what's next? I'm going to be sharing with you what makes for some of the best early or emergent readers that you can find. I'm going to be asking, what is an early reader book? What is an emergent reader book? What should I be looking for in those books that my child first picks up as they begin to read to themselves, as they begin to read? It's such an important and exciting time. Every bit as thrilling as watching them learn to walk. It's so beautiful to watch them learn to read, and at the same time, you know that they're never going to be the same. Today, I'm going to help you, hopefully, sort through some of the jargon related to early readers, and then I'm going to outline the characteristics of some of the best early readers. I'll be sharing with you my favorite early readers, I'll be sharing with you some transitional readers, and then I'll be sharing with you some of my favorite and not so favorite early chapter books. I'm even going to tell you what I really think about Junie B. Jones, Ivy and Bean, and the Magic Treehouse series. I will even be giving you some ideas about what you can give your very precocious reader. I will help you find books for your first grader who has the reading level of a sixth grader. The first thing I want to do is back up a step and tell you that there are several options if your child is still in the Bob book phase. There are a couple of options I noticed. So if your child still has read the Bob books and are bored of them but still need that level of reading, there's a group called First Little Readers Guided Reading Books, and they have levels A through F. I have not personally tried these out. I have to tell you that. I'm just telling you about them in case you need a quick fix for more Bob book-like books. All of the ones in the A series are going to be at the A level. Same for B. And there are several within each letter of the alphabet. So the C's will have a series of books all at the C level, C reading level. And another one is called CTP, Itty Bitty Phonics Readers, 60 Easy Phonics Guides, A through D. I know with one of my children, she's so audially configured that she would just memorize the Bob books, and pretty soon she wouldn't be reading them. So sometimes you have to change things up to make sure that they're actually reading. The first thing that I want to do is demystify the language. So when I say easy reader and emergent reader and kindergarten book, transitional reader, or even beginning reader book, those are all the same thing, insofar as they're referring to books for children that are meant to help the child grow their reading ability, grow their language understanding. I would say beginning reader is at the very beginning of this process, and that a transitional reader is a book right before your child would perhaps start reading early chapter books. I want to give you a heads up. If all this content is very new for you, I would encourage you to go to a library and see how the librarians organize the books and have the librarian explain the rationale for the order within the library, so that you don't get lost trying to find just right books for your child at their reading level. If you're shopping for books at the library for an oldest child who's learning to read, it might make sense when you discover really good books that you like that are early readers to buy some. But I would not buy early readers until you have figured the early reader thing out. I would use the library to try before you buy, unless this podcast gives you a lot of certainty that you have found what you're looking for. Then definitely buy, because it helps me. Thank you again to all the darling people who do buy books through my links. First, I'd like to clarify the term early reader. An early reader does not mean a book designed for a child who's learned to read earlier relative to their peers. Rather, readers in this case are not your children, but the books. Specifically, it's a book meant to help a child learn to read or master the reading. That's what's meant by reader in this case. And early just means they're the first books that your child is using to master reading. Early reader. Got it? I know you probably knew that already, but if you didn't, it's valuable to know. Early reader, beginning reader, and all of that. The great variety of these terms all mean books that have vocabulary and word usage. Perhaps words are repeated or familiar or are sight words, and simple sentence construction that is just right. I would say just right for them means that at least 85% of the words are easily readable or decodable. One of the most important things about these emergent reader books is that they sustain the child's joy in reading, that they aren't too discouraging, and that they keep their interest, and that they keep them motivated for decoding that 5 to 15% of the words that are tricky or unfamiliar. Early reader books, easy reader books will have an abundance of pictures that also help the child to decode what they're reading. It gives them moments of rest to help them make sense of what they're reading and to also to enrich the storyline. At this point in your child's awakening to literacy, it's just so important that we keep the joy of reading. It can be a hard or frustrating time because your child is used to listening to rich stories, and they can't read themselves stories that have that same rich content that you would be reading to them. And so even though there's something slightly utilitarian, that's one way of seeing it, these easy readers need to be also rich. They need to have good writing and great illustrations, or at least good illustrations and great writing. If you can write an easy reader book with a depth to the writing, you must be some kind of particular genius. And it's possible you can write sentences in which things are sort of understated. One of my favorite examples is Mr. Putter and Tabby series. Some of those understatements in the Mr. Putter and Tabby books, along with these hilarious illustrations. Oh my goodness. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. That's one of my big recommendations. I love Cynthia Rylant. She does have a particular genius. There is something about this stage of books. There's something about easy readers or emergent readers that reminds me a little bit of the board books stage of children's literature, or the things that you would read to a 2-year-old. The vocabulary is simple again, but it doesn't have to be dumb. It doesn't have to be vacuous. Words can become poetic again. You can pack meaning into simplicity and humor. Definitely. So our emerging reader books need to be good writing. They need to have characters with character. Characters that are interesting, good, lovable, quirky, likable. You want the characters in your child's early readers that if they were living people, you'd be glad, or at least not mind, your child being friends with them. And as for illustrations, the first thing I would say is something negative, which is try to make sure that they're non-TV looking, non-commercial looking, non-cartoonish, that they're as natural as possible, that there's some artistic realism at work in the illustrations. You want the illustrations of your child's easy readers to have some artistic merit. My friend Erin Graver, who blogged for us on the Bright Wings website, her blog is entitled Growing an Instinct for Beauty, and she tells us that art in a book should draw our attention to the human, to the tactile, to the real. That art in a book should deepen our experience of the story. And I think this is particularly true, again, when it comes to early readers. And I have to say, I think a lot of early readers probably fall short in this area. Not all of them, but a number of them. I think a lot of early readers' illustrations are pretty cartoonish at this point. They kind of think they need to convince kids, hey, reading is fun. Look at my splashy illustrations. You will see in the book list that there are quite a few that I've recommended that the illustrations really are beautiful and interesting and fulfill those things that Erin proposes to us that are valuable. I do have some others on that list that are newer and splashier too. Right, so I've mentioned we need good writing and good illustrations. Along with good writing, I think part of the good writing, besides characterization and deep word usage and use of language, an enriching way to use language, along with those qualities, I think we also need plot. We need enough action within the limitations of the child's vocabulary and within the structure of the book to motivate engagement. All right, so those are the qualities that we're looking for, but let me throw one more thing in here. These early readers can have broad differences in how complex they are. One book can be 500 words, and another book, also called an easy reader, can be 5,000 words. Themes, storylines can be more or less complex. The increasing complexity is referred to as leveled readers. I am going to try to give you my recommendations from the simplest books to the more complex books, but I can't make any guarantees. And also it's also driven by your own child's ability. So to begin with what is first, we really enjoy the Henry and Mudge stories by Cynthia Rylant, and they come in an early reader version. They have a Puppy Mudge collection. Puppy Mudge wants to play. Puppy Mudge needs a snack. So these books have great illustrations. They have plenty to look at, and then each page has about one sentence for your child to read. And then as you read these, you gradually grow more able to read the more complex Henry and Mudge books. Those stories, also by Cynthia Rylant, have short, spaced-out paragraphs on each page. Still plenty of illustration to help children pick out what they're reading. I really like Henry as a kid. He's so kind, but he's thoroughly engaged with reality. He has a big, huge, slobbery dog. He's not too careful about staying super clean. He just lives a rough and tumble life. And, his shoes are not always tied. His hair is rumpled. But he's such a good kid and really engaged with reality. A perceptive kid, a thinking kid. The other series that I mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast, also by Cynthia Rylant, is called Mr. Putter and Tabby. And I adore these books. They are a little harder than the Puppy Mudge books, and I think, in my opinion, they're a little easier than the Henry and Mudge books. I don't know how you can create elderly characters that kids find so lovable and so funny, but Cynthia Rylant has done it. Mr. Putter has a cat named Tabby, and his next door neighbor is Mrs. Teaberry, and she has a good dog who's a bulldog named Zeke. These books provide ample examples that the young and the old can love each other and understand each other. Plus, and they also provide ample examples that it's simple, ordinary things can be really engaging and really funny. Picking pears, trying to run a race when you're old, or being older and catching a cold. What's that like? Kids can sympathize with some of these things. And it's funny to see that an adult like Mr. Putter still enjoys being cared for by his good neighbor, Mrs. Teaberry. But kids understand that. But I think some of the humor in the books comes from the fact that kids can't understand certain things. They just can't imagine what it's like to have, quote, creaky knees. The great news with the Mr. Putter and Tabby books is that there's about 25 of them. Regarding the illustrations for Mr. Putter and Tabby and Henry and Mudge, so they're not clean lines like computer-generated images. They're definitely more hand-drawn. They're not super beautiful, I wouldn't say, but they are really interesting. They're full of personality and detail that make looking at them interesting. They're quite naturalistic, and they're very sympathetic illustrations. Okay, a few more of the best early readers. Let's remember all the books written by Arnold Lobel. So the Frog and Toad books, Owl at Home, Mouse Tales, and Mouse Soup. These are classic books. They are really great for children who are getting into reading. They've got great illustrations like we're talking about and good writing. There's friendship, adventure, daring, quiet things, and so much wonderful silliness. I have to tell you, I do a killer job reading Tearwater Tea. It's so funny and emotional that I almost make myself genuinely cry. Someday in the future, I'll have to give you my rendition. It's seriously one of my favorite stories to read aloud. Another series of early readers that I enjoy is one by Jan van Leeuwen. It's called Tales of Oliver Pig, and the book's following that. Her earliest books were published in the 80s, and they were illustrated by Arnold Lobel, the same author-illustrator as the Frog and Toad books. So that's fun. That adds something interesting. Visual style continuity with something else you might have read. There's some decent plot in these books, plot implying problem, but the problems aren't too big, not too burdensome. They're very gentle books overall. Jean Van Leeuwen went on to write more stories about this family, the pig family here, and Oliver's little sister Amanda grows up. And so there's kind of a new branch of the stories are called Amanda Pig, First Grader, in the books following that. Different illustrator, not Arnold Lobel, a little more cartoonish. It's got bright, simple colors, and it's considered a transitional reader, which means it's for kids who can read multi-syllable words, compound words. They are able to see different points of view within the story, understand different points of view. These stories are definitely more complex and definitely have more sentences and multi-syllable words than the Oliver Pig books. Amanda Pig is a confident, engaging little hog, and I think the stories are pretty good. I have to say, I haven't read every single one in the series, but as far as I can tell, these are really decent books. Very good readers. Regarding transitional readers, I want to give a shout out to my old friend, Amelia Bedelia, written by Peggy Parrish. I loved her when I was a kid, and we still enjoy her around here at this point. She's tricky because she has so many homophones and homonyms that she's working with. And those are the basis of the humor in the books. All the misunderstandings that Amelia Bedelia manages to get herself into. Those are fun and language building and conversation building. As for more modern transitional readers, I think I would consider the Katie Woo series by Fran Minushkin to be kind of a transitional reader. These are really good books. Katie Woo's an Asian American, and she has a friend, Pedro, with his own series. And these books have really appealing packaging. They look really fun. They look, some bright, bold colors for the Pedro book, some more pretty things for the Katie Woo series, and the pictures and the text are really relevant. There's a reasonable amount of plot development. So Katie Woo's titles are Katie Woo, No More Teasing, Katie Woo, Moving Day, Katie Woo, The Big Lie. So she goes through some difficult things. The problems aren't really heavy. Her friends are pretty forgiving when she has difficulties with them. And Katie Woo is really pretty resilient. Pedro's titles are Pedro for President, Pedro's Big Goal, Pedro Gets Rich. Just fun books. They really would sustain attention and keep interest in children that you're trying to get them to read and to love reading and to continue moving forward with their reading ability. The Katie Woo and Pedro books, they're not Frog and Toad, but they're fun. They're splashy and modern. They were published probably 5 years ago. They have good content and they have good friendships with each other, healthy relationships with each other. Next, I want to turn to some early chapter books, a series called Ivy and Bean. It's written by Annie Barrows. She's been an adult author up to this point. I want to say that I think the writing is good, that it's well written, especially excellent for young readers transitioning to chapter books. I think there's a nice amount of illustrations that allow the reader to kind of rest along the way. There's this theme of friendship with an unexpected person. That's a great theme. The covers look really fun and sweet, but I have to say, I've had so many parents tell me that their heads just have whipped back with surprise at the content. There's constant negativity towards Bean's sister, and Ivy participates in that. There's really mean language, rude language. There's some stealing. There's tricking of siblings and of their mothers. There's some violence, hitting with each other, putting a worm in a sibling's mouth. We're not cool with bullying other people, but there's bullying of Bean's sibling in this story, and it's portrayed as normal, and the moms are looking the other way. So all that to say that as beginning chapter books, these are not behaviors that I want to reinforce in my home. If religious themes are important to you, there's magic and witchcraft as religious themes in this book that are definitely not apparent from the book covers. May I suggest as an alternative to Ivy and Bean, a series that I've discovered called Zoe and Sassafras. That's actually really fun to say. Zoe and Sassafras. It's meant for readers in grades 4 through 6, but it's good material for precocious readers in grades 1 and 2 and 3 for sure, who need really reliably decent material for reading. It has really positive relationships. In each book, a different magical animal needs help from Zoe, and with the help of her science knowledge, she finds a solution for each creature. So the problems are magical with scientific solutions. It's a very interesting combo. You might have to have a conversation or two about the difference between magic and science, which at this point in history is easy to keep distinct, but we know it's possible if you follow a certain kind of logic to conflate the two, such as what happens in C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy. How's that for a parenthetical statement? Zoe and Sassafras. They're fun, they're splashy, they're fun content, and a good alternative. What do I think of Junie B. Jones by Barbara Park? She's in a lot of schools and plenty of homes. Brr, no Junie in this house. No, privately, I think she's funny. Very privately. Publicly, I don't want kids to read her or act like her. When they do, I've seen their behavior change. She's disrespectful, she rolls her eyes, she manipulates people, she values things which I'd rather de-emphasize in the life of my children, like popularity and money. One of my kids developed some keen social interest in those areas, I think because of Junie. Let me suggest an alternative. Goony Bird Green by Lois Lowry. It's got great writing, great characterization, and the illustrations that are sprinkled throughout are reasonably good. She's like what Junie B. Jones could be if her powers were turned to good. Goony Bird loves words and is a storyteller. She comes alongside her teacher to support good writing and classroom order. She's intensely curious and fun. She gets everybody to start dressing up in the classroom simply by her own sort of an outlandish, wonderful example. She helps the teacher teach good writing and storytelling by being an amazing storyteller herself. And all along the way, she has promised at the beginning of her stories that all the stories she tells are true, and you don't know how it possibly can be the case. Everyone thinks that she must be stretching the truth. But without fail, you are astonished by the way that the stories that she tells are in fact true at the end, such as how the cat was consumed by the cow. These books are highly appealing, and you could start reading them at age 5 or 6 if you have that reading level. There are 6 books in the series, and Goony Bird is a second grader. Even though the main protagonist is a girl, there's lots of boys in the class that have lots of character, and some of the storylines follow them a little bit. So there's plenty to love. My boy-girl twins really delighted in these books. I also think I could recommend a book called Clementine by Sarah Pennypacker. That's the first in a series on this character. She gets into the same kind of troubles as Junie B. Jones does. She's very cute and funny. The big difference is her intentions are completely different than Junie. There's not a lot of manipulation going on. She's an artistic kid. She actually has a great deal of paying attention ability, but she's often faulted for not paying attention. It's just that she's not paying attention to what the adults in her life think she ought to be focusing on. Her parents are able to understand this perceptiveness positively and know that it's going to take her far in life, this ability to notice small things. It's only a problem because right now they distract her. As a character, I find she's very different than Junie. Like I said, she makes a lot of the similar mistakes. However, she's really, really trying. There's no manipulation, and she has good relationships with her parents, and she really does respect adults. It's not a facade like it is with Junie. So that's a series called Clementine by Sarah Pennypacker. This might be one you would want to glance at, as I'm not actually sure a child can tell a difference between Clementine and Junie. But I am pretty sure a kid could tell the difference because a kid understands what trying looks and feels like. One heads up on this, I haven't read any of the other books in the series, just the first book. Last but not least of the early chapter books, the beginning chapter books that I wanted to talk about was the Magic Tree House series. I'm going to share my opinion with you, and I'm also going to share what I know of the opinions of other good families. First, I think there is so much to love about the Magic Tree House books. What I love is that Jack and Annie do go on so many adventures and they visit so many historical places, and they are engaging deeply with historical content. They're thinking through and remembering and caring personally about all these different ages and events in history. I love that. The Magic Tree House books, I think, do a great job through the characters of Jack and Annie, engaging a child who might not be interested in, say, the Old West, or perhaps dinosaurs, perhaps the Middle Ages. Name a topic that your child has not been exposed to and is not interested in, right? These books take your child there. And because your child cares about Jack and Annie, they go there too. What I like about the Magic Tree House books is that Jack and Annie are smart, decent, really interesting. They're good to each other. I think their relationship actually improves as the series goes on. And because of Jack and Annie and their traveling to all these different places, not only does your child go there too, but it helps your child not get really locked in to one particular place or time period. It gives your child a really broad scope for history and even for literature. It helps clue them into some of these more important events, more important historical actors. You can laugh if you want, but it has also helped me learn about some less well-known historical events too. So it used to be that I had a rule that I was definitely not going to be reading Magic Tree House to my children, but my second child was not keen on reading, but she begged me to read to her the Magic Tree House books, and so I read probably almost the entire series plus the Merlin missions to her. I know, I did it, but my twins are reading them now. My 7-year-old daughter has read 10 since the beginning of the school year. It's hard not to be proud of that. They are page turners and they are formulaic. Okay, so those are a bit of their downsides. The other big downside in the series, and this is what some other trusted families have told me they don't like about Magic Tree House books, is that Jack and Annie will often lie. They will often lie to adults when they are on their missions. When they arrive and people are asking them, oh, where are your parents? Jack and Annie lie. They lie pretty often for the sake of the mission. What I would like to see instead is I'd like to see Jack and Annie find creative ways to remain faithful to the truth without lying. Of course, Jack and Annie sneak out all the time, sometimes in the middle of the night. They almost always go out to the treehouse without telling their parents or by using some kind of subterfuge that they're going out to the woods before they go on their adventures. They almost never have permission to be doing what they're doing. Their parents never know. They keep this a secret from their parents. I'm going to quote Kristen Winalda on her blog, Big Books, Little Ears. She writes, I don't mind books where children make poor choices as long as there are consequences of those choices or the characters have a guilty conscience. Jack and Annie have none of that. They are two elementary age kids who sneak away from their parents all the time and have awesome adventures and no consequences for sneaking out and lying. I'm going to be honest, she writes. My kids are crazy, so I don't need to have sneaking out of the house normalized for them. I think Kristen has a pretty fair take on the situation. I understand her concerns. I also, for us, we're constantly having conversations about character in our family and virtue. And so I feel like the chances of Magic Tree House developing my children into people who are irresponsible or who lie to me are smaller. Again, though, I completely respect anybody who says, you know what, this book or this series is just not for us, or is just not for this kid. Right now, what I'm really keen on is allowing this series to draw my child in and to make them a more fluent reader. I think Magic Tree House series is a series that can help a child catch the magic of reading, after which they don't have to read every single Magic Tree House book. So we will see. If I have Magic Tree House regrets later, I'll be sure to tell you. All right, let's talk about precocious readers. I've had a handful of parents contact me because they have children who are, in the classic sense, very early readers. They've learned to read at 3 or 4, and they're burning through all kinds of material, and they're looking for content that is age appropriate to a little child. I would consider this a pretty vulnerable reading group. Before I offer you my best helpful ideas on this, I just have 2 things I wanted to say. The first is, I'm so jealous. And the second is, I'm not jealous of you. I feel both of these things. Okay, seriously. To all of our mothers and fathers that have precocious readers, Last night, I was at a birthday party for a girl who just turned 7, and she is reading the Black Stallion books by Walter Farley. That is staggering to me. She's just turned 7. As I mentioned, this is a tricky thing to navigate for mothers and fathers. Having a very little child who has a very advanced reading level, it's tricky because you want to give them at least something benign, but you also want to be able to give them something that's as rich as possible. Benign, why? Why? Because you shouldn't hand a 5-year-old a copy of The War That Saved My Life, even though he could read every word of it and understand all the vocabulary. Thematically, such a book is well beyond his ability to synthesize, but high quality insofar as you want complex language for your growing reader. You want characters with characters who grow better over time or recognize their flaws. Their moral imagination is very vulnerable to being shaped by what they read, especially because their intelligence, their spirituality, their decision-making, their moral framework, their psychological maturity, all of those categories are under construction. They're all under development. They are all in the process of being shaped, right? That's why these precocious readers are in a vulnerable spot. Perhaps also one of the goals in this situation would be to keep the child's interests as broad as possible and not specialize too early. For example, I think fantasy is a category where it's easy to run out of really high quality, true, good, beautiful, virtuous characters. So I think an important thing is to try to keep the child's interests wide open in terms of the literature that you're providing for them. Another couple of series, if you have a child who is a young child who is reading chapter books and you are out of books, these next 2 series are ones that I would recommend. Nancy Drew and the Good Old Hardy Boys. These books have been updated for our modern understanding of social justice. They've been scrubbed of some of their failures in this regard, and they have so much to offer. There's a wonderful sense of adventure. There's a wonderful sense of problem solving. I am, of course, more familiar with Nancy Drew. She is always up to the task. She always has specialized ability that suit the needs of the current mystery that she's solving, and I'm sure the case is the same for the Hardy Boys. Of course, they're tremendously formulaic, but they have some serious advantages for this age group. Nancy Drew is always very well-mannered and respectful, even to, her enemies. Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys communicate the message, you too can save the day. And along the way, they teach you a lot of things about history that are just absent, such as payphones and lunch counters and words like impetuous and keen, good-natured, and quizzical. So perhaps your child doesn't need to read every story in these series, but they're very handy to have a long supply of very decent reading material that helps to develop a sense of history and great vocabulary. I think they're a good choice for a young and talented reader. When my oldest was in about 2nd grade, she started reading Nancy Drew, and she read Nancy Drew books like crazy for like 2 years. Yeah, she became quite a reading addict, and perhaps it was largely due to Nancy Drew and those cliffhanger endings. And my husband and his brothers read Hardy Boys, I think, growing up. But what if Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys are not your thing? What if you have this young, precocious reader? What else can I give you? So I'm going to run through a few options. I'm going to put a huge book list attached to the show notes of this podcast, which you can mine for reading opportunities. So there's Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. There's The Black Stallion and all of those associated books by Walter Farley. Then there's one called Mayfield Crossing. There's one, The Year of Miss Agnes, A Door in the Wall, The Moffats, Understood Betsy, the Redwall series by Brian Jacques, Mountain Born, and The Saturdays, and Because of Winn-Dixie. Okay, so I just rattled a whole bunch of those off, but I will give you a really good book list with the titles I mentioned and more. One more thing, I want to say that I think a reading addiction is a much better human problem than a screen addiction. It's a really beautiful thing, truly. After all, I was one of these kids, and look at where I am today, right? But it's also the case that I was reading so much because There was a lot of intensity, a lot of keenness that had no other outlet, and maybe a lack of direction or involvement from an adult of how to use that energy and intensity and keenness for life. So I just want to say, let's also remember to keep children that are little but were precocious readers, let's remember to keep them busy with things other than reading. It can be terribly convenient. I know from personal experience, it can be terribly convenient that a child keep him or herself busy reading. I don't have to be involved. I don't have to take them anywhere. There they are doing something good. They're out of trouble and they don't require any of my attention. What wouldn't I love? Sometimes it can be too easy for us. So I'm just advocating for balance. It's really important that children of this age are getting enough time outside, that they're actively playing, that they're using their hands for things other than holding books. And providing that can sometimes be a lot harder even than finding enough books to keep up with them. But very young children between ages 3 and 8 who are really precocious readers, these very same children need a diversity of activities and interests. So far be it from me to counsel you to limit reading, but at the same time, if you're having trouble keeping up with your super precocious, fluent reader, perhaps you should consider getting them involved in other things, other aspects of living. I know you probably are. I'm sorry. I'm just saying because I wish I'd gotten my oldest out and active a little bit more. Maybe I should say a word about why I didn't include the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis or the Green Ember series by S.D. Smith in this listing of good books for precocious readers. The reason I didn't, this is a personal decision, but let me share with you my thinking because that's what this podcast is about. The reason I didn't include those two series isn't because they aren't totally beautiful and worthy, but because I think they're best read if you're going to read them to yourself when you're 8 or so, a little bit older, so that you can really receive the wealth that is in these books. Maybe I'm wrong, or maybe your kid is different. It just seems to me that if you're reading the Chronicles of Narnia or Green Ember when you're 6, you're going to miss a lot. And my fear would be that you wouldn't come back as an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old and reread those books. Perhaps that child would think, oh, I read those books when I was little and I'm so done with that. I want to save these books for my kids so that when they receive them, they're going to make a big impact on their heart and their mind. I want them to be able to take in more than just the broad stripes of the physical action. So my opinion on these books is that they're marvelous books and that they're definitely great books to read to self, but that if I would save them for an older child who's at least 8, maybe 10, as read to self books, I would save them rather than give them to my precocious reader. One of the reasons that you listen to this, that you listen to me, is that you know I'm not an advocate for twaddle. In this case, twaddle being vacuous books or books that are less meaningful. But for this age that we're talking about, very early readers and up to early chapter books, sometimes what we're looking for is simply benign books. Benign books are especially intended for this category of reader. And yet I want to encourage you to please remember at this point, when your child is starting to read to themselves, that they still need you to read the more meaningful works that they can't read to themselves. This group of beginning readers really, really needs parents to keep reading high quality children's literature to them so that they can keep developing the deeper parts of their humanity, their minds, and their hearts. If you're at a point in your life where you simply are not reading to each child aloud every day, I'm not going to guilt trip you. Sometimes that's where you're at, especially if you have a child who is reading to themselves or is listening to audiobooks on their own. Sometimes you're kind of off the hook for reading to them a little bit, but persist in trying to connect with them because books are portals of meaning. Perhaps you can find a routine moment to ask them about what they're reading, either at the dinner table or when you're in the car together. These can be beautiful moments for connecting, formative moments for connecting. It's these conversations around books that make books have a transformative impact on your child's life.